Shout out to G-Man Boxing. Where's the piss bottle? It's over there.
You know, over the years, I've seen a lot of Dillian Whyte interviews, read a lot of his interviews. Sometimes he says things that, are funny. He goes in on people. Sometimes he says things that, makes a lot of sense. But then there's other times he says things and you just think, huh? For example, I remember last year, I think it was last summer, he said that Anthony Joshua tried to avoid a fight with him in April 2019, which was completely ridiculous because they offered Dillian Whyte that fight, and I think it was him who said the money wasn't right or something like that. So he does sometimes say things that are just a bit out there. But he gave an interview with Sky Sports, and I am shaking my head reading this. I am looking at this and I'm just like, what the hell? Now, he does touch on certain points here, right? There are certain points he says that, I look at and I'm like, all right, okay, some things yes, some things not. He's talking, for starters, about Tyson Fury, and he basically feels, it's more so what he said with the WBC and his status as interim champion that I want to talk about. But basically, he's saying that Fury and Wilder get too much credit for their wins. He's saying here that everyone lets him get away with talking what. He's on about the Klitschko fight, specifically for Tyson Fury. He says Klitschko was a great fighter, a great champion, but when he fought Klitschko, I don't know what happened to Klitschko that day. Sometimes he's good, other times it doesn't seem like he was there to fight. With Vladimir, it's like some fights he's good, and the other fights, it's just like psychologically he's not there. He wasn't there that night for sure, and we never got to see the rematch. So I'll just touch on that first. That Klitschko fight, Tyson Fury was able to mess with range with Klitschko. He was able to out-jab Klitschko. He was able to outbox Klitschko. He made Vladimir Klitschko feel... You could see it from You could see Klitschko was uncomfy prior to that fight, because Fury really got the psychological edge over Klitschko from the press conferences. Klitschko's always been a fighter where... A good example would be when he's under pressure or when he's not comfy in the ring. He clinches, he gets a bit all over the place. Like, for example, go back and look at his fight with Sam Peter, the first fight. He was down 3 times in that fight. Now, those knockdowns were not concussive knockdowns. They weren't even, Vladimir wasn't hurt with any of them knockdowns. This wasn't long removed from the Lemon Brewster fight, the fight where he was stopped. And Vladimir was so worried about the pressure, he was so worried about his chin, that whenever it got really tough in there, he just folded, Since then, he employed a lot of clinching, obviously noticeably against Povetkin. That was a really bad fight. That fight was a strange one, because he clinched so much in that fight, he should have been disqualified. And the referee, Louis Pabon, did a terrible job. But Louis Pabon is actually not a bad referee. That was a really weird fight, because Pabon did a terrible job refereeing that fight. But if you go and look at Louis Pabon as a referee in a whole, he's actually quite a good referee. He's not a bad referee. So for me, that fight was strange. I'm not going to say, but that fight was strange that Louis Pabon could put on a performance so poor in terms of refereeing and officiating, but yet since has put on very good performances as a referee. Louis Pabon is an interesting one. But that's Klitschko in a nutshell. The only time Klitschko really went for it in that fight was in the 12th round, where he felt, I've let this fight go, I gotta step on the gas, and by then it was too little too late. So the Fury win over Klitschko was a good win. Klitschko's always been like that. As I said, look at his fight against Sam Peter in the first fight. It got a bit uncomfy in there for Klitschko, and whenever Sam Peter would put it on Klitschko, he just kind of went, he wasn't hurt with any of them knockdowns. It was just more so panic, essentially, was what Vladimir Klitschko was doing. He goes on to say Fury and Wilder get too much credit for their cherry-picked records and have only beaten one Current Ring Magazine top 10 fighter each. Whyte said, I've beaten all 3. Fury calls himself the greatest of all time, yet he's turned down fights against me, even when it was ordered by the WBC. That guy's a joker. That I don't remember. Now, I've no recollection of the WBC ever ordering Fury versus Dillian Whyte. I know Fury was kind of talking about a diamond belt back in 2019, but I don't know if that was ever ordered necessarily. So I don't know about that. If I'm wrong, someone please correct me in the comment section. Let me know. If that fight was ever ordered, please do let me know. But off the top of my head, I don't recall it being that way. I think they were originally... It might have been the original plan was for Dillian Whyte and Brazil to have a final eliminator, but then obviously when Fury didn't take the Wilder rematch straight away, they obviously done Brazil versus Wilder. I'm not sure. If someone wants to correct me in the comment section, you're more than welcome to. It goes on as far as say, this is kind of where I really want to talk about here. This is where I think it's really silly what he's saying. But anyway, I will read this verbatim for you now. He says, if I had fought Wilder, he's talking about himself, I would have beaten Wilder before Fury. If I'd have beaten Wilder, I'd be undisputed cruiserweight. I'd be undisputed WBC champion by now. As things stands, there are 2 WBC heavyweight champions. We have the exact same belt. How can Fury fight be for undisputed when he's not even undisputed WBC champion? Right, well, that is a ridiculous statement to make by Dillian Whyte. That interim titles mean zilch. They literally mean they're a glorified mandatory status. That's all they are. That's literally all an interim title is. The only difference between that and being named as mandatory challenger, if Tyson Fury subsequently decides to vacate his WBC title, if you are mandatory, you have to fight the next available contender. I believe it's not always number 1 and number 2, but it's the next available contender you have to fight for the title. So you don't get elevated to champion if you're mandatory. You have to fight for the vacant title. If you are interim champion, you're elevated to champion. That's the only difference. Does it mean you're world champion? Based off of what he's saying there, then Usyk can never be called undisputed cruiserweight champion, because at the time I believe Lebedev was the interim champion when Usyk was undisputed cruiserweight champion, right? The interim titles are just there. They're just another belt. They're nothing. He can't, Dillian Whyte, it's very silly for him to come out and say that, you know, he's partially WBC champion if he's interim title. No, he's not. I remember Eubank tried to play that card a couple of years ago, back in like 2015, when he was the WBA interim champion at middleweight. No one bothered. They chucked that away fairly quick. That's a silly statement from Dillian Whyte to make. To even insinuate that AJ versus Fury won't be undisputed because he's got the interim title. I mean, come on now. What then? What is, you know, Brian, what's his name? Trevor Bryan? Is he champion because he's regular WBA champion? To be honest with you, as silly as that title is, it's still more of a recognised title than the interim title is, to be fair. You know, it's not much, but at least it's something. At least they will call mandatories from time to time, and at least they will try and, you know, unify it with the main WBA champion. But that's so silly, because judging by what he's saying there, there's no such thing as undisputed, because we have interim WBA titles. We could have an interim IBF title pop up with WBO. They all do interim titles. We have a regular title there. Judging by that, undisputed, why do we even call it undisputed? There's no such thing, because all these titles are knocking around. It's ridiculous. That's just Dillian Whyte just talking you know what. You know, Dillian Whyte will eventually get his crack at a world title, I believe. You know, I say that, but it depends how he plays it. You know, if he is dead set on fighting Deontay Wilder and they can get that fight over the line, I wouldn't pick Dillian Whyte. I've got no great love for Deontay Wilder. You know my stance on him. Love watching him as a fighter, as a person, not really. But I think Deontay Wilder would take Dillian Whyte's head clean off it. Even now, even this version of Deontay Wilder, we've no idea how good he is or how damaged he is post Fury. But I still believe that if he lands even partially, and he still has that little bit of speed, he'll take Dillian Whyte's head clean off his shoulders. If Dillian Whyte was to fight a contender, like we'll say Joseph Parker, we can see how he looked post Chisora if he beats Chisora. But if he was to fight someone like Joseph Parker, that's a tough fight. You know, there's tough fights to be had there for Dillian Whyte. So I used to think Dillian Whyte would lose before he got his world title crack in February it would have been February of this year to beat Povetkin. He did lose to Povetkin. So I don't doubt that we could see something like that happen again, especially now that Dillian Whyte's been brutally knocked out. We don't know how his chin's going to be. Povetkin never landed a meaningful shot at all in that fight. That was the worst I ever seen Povetkin. So we need to see how Dillian Whyte looks. He might have looked great against Povetkin, but lest we forget that was that Povetkin Povetkin should retire. That's how poor he was. So it's not an accurate gauge. Like, he could go in there next fight, for argument's sake. They could put him in just in an alternate universe. Just say they put him in with Joe Joyce or Michael Hunter. I'd pick Joe Joyce to beat Dillian Whyte. I'd pick Michael Hunter to beat Dillian Whyte. You know, that's just the way I have a look. Dillian Whyte has flaws there. He's got strengths, but he also has flaws. We need to look at both his strengths and weaknesses. There's a lot of fighters in the top 10 if he decides to pursue a fight with someone in the top 10 who could expose a lot of them. You know, someone like Michael Hunter, his speed, someone like Joe Joyce, his accuracy, his strength, his durability, you know, I'm just naming them. Someone like Joe Parker, if he has that little bit more tenacity, you know, if he doesn't let that fight slip away, because you go back and watch early on in that fight, Joe Parker was superior to Dillian Whyte in terms of speed, in terms of boxing ability. So, you know, when you look at the upper echelons of the heavyweight division, for Dillian Whyte, if he wants to take a fight with one of these guys, you know, whilst he's waiting for his title shot, there's a good chance he could lose. Very good chance. So, you know, that's what I say about that. That's a very silly statement that he made about Tyson Fury and, you know, him being, you know, partially WBC. He's not. He's interim champion. You know, they're worlds apart, you know. So that's my thoughts on that. Let me know yours in the comments section below, what your thoughts are on that statement by Dillian Whyte, and what you think his plans are moving forward. What do you think his next step is going to be? I don't think I've really talked much about that, you know, what Dillian Whyte's, you know, next step is going to be in terms of who he's going to fight next or what route he's going to go. I don't think this will happen, but if Fury AJ does break down, I think Tyson Fury should fight Dillian Whyte next. You know, and in fact, that's the fight I'll be saying he needs to have next if it's not Deontay Wilder. But even then, I want to see him fight Dillian Whyte next. If AJ Fury doesn't happen, I think it will personally. But that's what I want to see happen if AJ Fury doesn't happen next. They should both fight their mandatories. So I'll be calling for AJ to fight Usyk as well. Let me know in the comment section below what you think. Smash the like button if you did. Hope you enjoyed the video. We got to bring it back. Let's just do it because we can. Let's bring up hashtag GMansRocks. Better be trending. I'll talk to these lads and lassies. Peace.